Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Real GI Doc Show. I'm your host, Dr. Fred Gandolfo, and I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist with a medical practice here in Long Island, New York. And today's episode, I have a quick one for you, although it's kind of a two-part episode because I'm going to throw some current events in there too. As you know, we like to talk about cases on this show. And before I get into the meat of the episode, which is a follow-up to last episode where I talked about what not to do as a patient to have a good experience with your doctor, today I'm going to talk about things that you can do to really enhance the experience and really get what you need out of your doctor's office appointment visit. But before we get to that, there's a story that was sent to me today by a friend who, and it's very interesting because it's definitely a GI related topic. So I'm going to read this. This comes from the New York Post, a questionable newspaper at best, but it talks about, the headline here is "A salad cost Dodgers pitcher Dustin May his season and almost his life." Very interesting headline here. So basically, this pitcher named Dustin May apparently had a, quote, freak accident in the summer, in July. And he was, it looks like he was eating a salad or something in a restaurant, and he felt that it was stuck in his esophagus, and it sounds like he had some discomfort or whatever it was. He said it was mega painful. He tried to wash it down with water. It didn't happen. He really had this bad pain for about 15 minutes, and then it kind of went away. So he went home and just tried to sleep it off or, handle it like everybody else does. Just if it's not bothering you, just ignore it and see what happens. That's pretty reasonable. So it sounds like he did that, and then eventually he went to the ER some undisclosed period of time here in this article. He went to the ER because he was still having issues or he couldn't swallow, whatever the deal was. And it sounds like at that point he had a tear in his esophagus. So that's not a good thing. He had a tear in his esophagus and he required emergency surgery. It sounds like with a thoracic surgeon, and he was out for 6 months, couldn't even lift more than 10 pounds because of the recovery period. And now he's preparing for a new season for baseball. So that's pretty cool. So the deal with this kind of thing, and this is just totally was not part of my episode today, but I like to talk about interesting stuff. An esophageal tear is a really bad thing if it happens. And what sounds like happened here is he had what's called a food impaction, which is where something, usually it's not lettuce, usually it's more like a solid piece of meat or something else. But if someone is eating and gets something stuck in the esophagus and it doesn't go down, it gets stuck. And then everything gets stuck on top of that. It's like a clogged pipe. So if you try to drink water, if you try to eat more food, it's going to get stuck on top of this impaction or blockage in the esophagus. And if you ignore it, sometimes it just goes away. The food will go down and you'll be okay. But that's kind of a gamble because if the food stays there, it can cause more and more pressure to build up inside the esophagus, and eventually the wall of the esophagus will start to get weakened by the pressure in there and the ability, the fact that you can't get anything down the esophagus. And in some cases, the wall can weaken to the point of it being prone to rupturing. So 24 hours later or 2 days later, you still have something stuck in the esophagus. Your body will start to retch or whatever it is, and you can actually tear your esophagus from having a blockage in there. That's a catastrophe. It's basically fatal unless you get it treated with emergency surgery. And the other instance in which this kind of thing can happen to someone who's previously healthy and has no real known issues is that there's a condition called eosinophilic esophagitis where you can develop it's an inflammatory / allergic response in the esophagus where you have abnormal cells that are part of the immune system that build up in the esophagus. It typically happens to younger people, usually young guys, but women can get it too. And it causes food to get stuck there. You can have the most innocuous little bite of food and it will get stuck in the esophagus, and often can lead to problems, especially if you start retching. So if you have food stuck in there and the esophagus is blocked and your body starts retching, now you're kind of twisting and squeezing the esophagus, and it's already not a normal esophagus to begin with. And in some people, you can actually tear the esophagus open, through all the layers of the esophagus. Now, when we treat people with this condition, we go down and look at the esophagus and we take biopsies, and we also can stretch the esophagus in a controlled fashion. And we are causing a little bit of tearing up, but just at the inner lining of the esophagus, the part that's scarred over. And when you're vomiting or retching, that's not a controlled situation, and you can actually create enough force that you can tear through the esophageal wall completely, like a full hole right through it. right into your chest cavity or your mediastinum, really is where it goes. And then you get infection and you basically die unless you get it fixed. So it's a terrible event to have happen, to tear one's esophagus. And you see this in people with forceful retching or vomiting, really for any reason. You can have a infection, a stomach infection, and have enough forceful vomiting that you can actually tear your esophagus, although it's pretty rare. You often see this condition in alcoholics who drink a ton and they are chronically retching and vomiting, and they can tear their esophagus also. It's a bad thing all around. And I don't know exactly what happened with him. I'm not his, doctor or whatever. I don't have any access to any information besides what's in that brief article. But it's a pretty rare thing to hear about, a young guy tearing his esophagus and being that sick. And I'm sure that the surgery was not pleasant. He had to have, typically what happens is you have to have multiple surgeons involved. You have a thoracic surgeon, you have to have someone to repair the esophagus. Oftentimes you have to have drains put in the collections. Sometimes oftentimes there's issues with the lungs as well. Like it's a major thing. You have chest tubes put in and all kinds of drains, and the esophagus has to get repaired. And then sometimes you have to have further surgery to kind of fix things up after that. So it's all in all, it's all done to save someone's life if that's the situation. So you do what you got to do. But interesting stuff. So if you have, the moral of the story is, if this just comes on out of nowhere, then obviously you have no warning. But if this kind of thing was preceded by some type of dysphagia, meaning difficulty swallowing or problems when you swallow, a lot of times your esophagus and your body is trying to tell you something. So if you're having trouble swallowing on a regular basis, or certain foods don't go down quite right, or things get stuck occasionally, that's really never ever normal. And either it's eosinophilic esophagitis, or it's a problem with acid reflux causing a stricture in the esophagus, or a blockage, or a partial blockage, or it's inflammation from various different conditions, including acid reflux, or it's a cancer there, or you could have eosinophilic esophagitis, if I didn't mention that already, I can't remember. But basically, it's not normal to have a problem swallowing. Really, most anything you should be able to swallow. If you can chew it up and swallow it, should kind of go down for the most part. Now, sure, if you eat like a velociraptor and try to swallow a giant chunk of meat, you could have a problem by just eating something that's just too big for human consumption. But rarely is that the case. Typically, if you're having trouble swallowing, it's because there's an issue there. So get that checked out before you are at a restaurant eating a piece of salad and then tear your esophagus and then you're almost dead. So that's the moral of the story there. And, that's enough about that. Now, today's episode, I wanted to go into a couple of things that you could do. I made a list of 5 things that people can do to have a really good experience at their doctor's office. So last episode, I went into what not to do. I basically had the long story short is that a patient kind of gave me an ultimatum, like, do this thing for me, which I didn't think was really safe to do to them, or they're going to leave my practice. And the short answer there was, I said goodbye and, find someone else to do something crazy to you, because I'm not going to do it. And you could listen to that episode. It's short and sweet. It's from last, 2 weeks ago. But I wanted to also give a counterpoint. And, what can you do as a patient to have a good experience? And this is not about how to behave in the doctor's office and whatnot. It's not some uppity thing about that. But it's more of what can you do to kind of enhance your outcome at the doctor's office? And if you're going in to see someone about a complicated problem, especially some GI problem, which can have, a whole bunch of different symptoms. It's not always a straightforward story. These are the 5 things that I can think of that would make your experience a lot better, and you'd probably get more out of the experience. Like you might get an answer, or you might get closer to the next steps without a lot of wasted time and multiple runaround type visits. So this is the way to do it. So, and this is in no particular order, but this is the order that I came up with. So let's see. Point number 1, it's really to have a clear understanding of what you're going to the doctor for. Now, this sounds really like elementary and basic, but really, like, what is the chief complaint? Like, why are you going to see the doctor in the first place? If you can summarize it in one sentence, what is the reason for your visit? What are the symptoms? And what's the story? So this sounds obvious, but it's not obvious. A lot of people come in and they don't have a cohesive story, or they don't really even know exactly what they're talking about. Now, of course, they have symptoms, but it's like they've never thought of them in any logical fashion. So they just kind of come in and say, hey, I have this pain. Okay, where's the pain? Oh, it's kind of like around my stomach somewhere. Okay, when did it start? It's been going on for a while. A while like a couple of weeks, or a while like a couple of years. Oh, it's been all my life. Or maybe it's been a month. I'm not really quite sure. And, so what makes it worse? Oh, it gets worse all the time, and I'm not really sure. It happens at nighttime sometimes, but I didn't have it for a past month or so. And, you get these stories that like you can't figure out what is going on. If I had to like write a narrative, which we do, we write a note at the end of the encounter. And if someone else read that note, they should kind of be able to kind of come to a conclusion. Like that's the whole point of these notes. It's a record of what's going on. Some of these notes I look at and I'm like, I don't even know what is what the actual complaint is. And sometimes we're talking in the office for 5 or 10 minutes before I actually understand like why they're even there. Now, of course, some of this stuff is just because it's hard to get a good history and people can't tell a linear story, and maybe I'm not taking a good history or whatever it is. But it really does help if you kind of like jot down the issues that you're having and try to like fix it into some kind of chronological order so that it makes sense. If you had to tell someone in an email what was going on and you had 2 paragraphs to tell that story, how would you kind of write your story? That really does help if you rehearse it beforehand, and if you know when the thing started, what was the time course here, what are the exact symptoms, what makes things worse, what makes things better, what kind of stuff have you tried before. That's all basic stuff, but you'd be surprised at how many people come in and have no idea of like what they're even there for because they're not really quite sure. It's almost like they're just thinking of it on the fly. So that's no good. And the longer we take to get to the point, the longer of the visit that you take up, and it's just no one has an infinite amount of time. So eventually, we have to cut to the chase. So if you have a good story, that's the best start. That's the kind of the best thing that you can do really when you're coming in to see the doctor. So jot down a few notes. Take some notes. Write the story out. When did things start? Take some notes about what is going on that makes it better, what makes it worse. That's basic stuff. Number 2, so the second thing that you can do to have a better experience when visiting any type of doctor is, if this is applicable, bring your past medical records and your scans and your scopes and blood work and whatever you have that's relevant to the visit. So people often think that all the doctors are on some big network of computers where I can just look up your stuff from anywhere in the world, and that's like couldn't be further from the truth. The medical system still has a lot of little silos and a lot of like there's 10 different ways you can get a CAT scan on Long Island, and there's 10 different places you can go to get blood work done. And I don't always have access to all those systems immediately. I can request the records. I can get them tomorrow or tonight or whatever it is. Some of the systems I can get into on the portal and log in on my own as a doctor and see what the scan is. But it's much better if you just bring it with you, because then I have it in front of me and we can read it off and I can look at it and talk to you about it. So don't put the burden on the practice to dig up medical records from 3 different practices. It's too much. It takes forever. A lot of times we request the records, we don't get them back in time, or the request just goes to someone else's, fax wastebasket or whatever it is, or email wastebasket, and it just doesn't happen. So, if you've had an extensive workup, if you're coming for a second or a third opinion, bring your records. That's the responsible thing to do. And this way I can look at them and then we can get to the next step instead of it's a meet and greet and then I have to go dig up your records from all over the tri-state area. It's just silly. So if you have them at home, bring them in. If you left them in your car, go get them. Like I hear all these stories. Oh, I have them on my living room table and I forgot to bring the folder in. Like, don't do that. Come on, like be responsible and bring your stuff in. Or email them to us ahead of time, or get them for us ahead of time and then call to make sure that your doctor actually sent them. That's actually the other way to do it. So that's a great thing. So physically bring them. I'll scan what I need. I don't need records from 30 to 40 years ago. I just need the relevant stuff. But if you bring it, you'll have saved yourself an entire visit, basically. Number 3. This is a really good one also, I think, that I wish more people did. And a lot of people make a list of their questions and their concerns, but almost nobody makes a list of the the 1 or 2 or 3 must address points. Like these are my absolute items that I have to get addressed today. I'm talking about the patient. So, if you're going to see the doctor as the patient and you make a list of the things that you must have addressed that are super important to you, like, what could this be? What's the worst thing this could be? Or what's my treatment exactly? Or what does this medicine do? What's the side effect? Or what should I expect in the next couple of years? Or, hey, I read this thing on the internet and I'm wondering how this affects me. Or is this something I might have? Whatever your questions are, everyone has their own agenda of questions. Write down the top couple of questions that you have that are really important, not the extraneous, I wonder if type questions, because there's not always time for those every visit, but the really important ones, the big questions, write those down and give the list to the doctor at the beginning of the visit. And this is like a frame shift from what most people do. So what most people do is they write down this list of 15 questions, and we finished the entire visit and we've talked and we've gone back and forth about things, and I'm satisfied and think that everything's been addressed that needs to be addressed. And then I get handed a list of 15 questions. And now like the clock is ticking. We're kind of done. And I have this list of questions, and a lot of them we kind of addressed just in the natural discussion. But some of them, if I knew the patient was concerned about some other thing, I could have worked that into our talk. I could have budgeted the time of our visit properly. But instead now I'm stuck with this list of questions, and I'm trying to like move on because there's only so much time in the world, right? So we need to like end the visit at some point. And if I had that list of questions ahead of time, I could have worked all that into my angles of what I was talking about. I could have went a little bit further into that thing that the patient cared about naturally in the course of discussion of whatever they're there for. So give the list to the doctor at the start of the visit, and then we can move forward much more nicely. And the other thing that happens is if you don't bring the list of questions, it's in your head or it's on your kitchen table, I'll get an email later, I'll get a phone call later, hey, I have all these additional questions after the visit. And the truth is like the visit's done and I don't have time to necessarily go back and email and call every single individual patient who has 7 or 8 questions that they found on the internet. So I don't mind answering those questions. I think they're great and you should have your questions answered. Like that's half the point of coming in to see me. But I really think the time to do it is when you're there in front of me, so then I can address the questions, right? Hey, that's a good question. I didn't think of that. Let's order a test to look at that thing that you're concerned about or whatever it is. Like you're there. The time to do it is when you're actually in the office, not the next day when you write me a 3-page email. Because the truth is like nobody has time to, I don't have time to do that. Like that's a visit. You have to come in and address that kind of stuff. Time is unfortunately the only resource that we just don't get enough of. But that's the story. So bring the list of questions and give it to the doctor at the beginning and say, hey, these are questions I have, and I just want them answered at some point during today's visit. You don't have to answer them right this second, but please, if you can address these things, that would be very helpful to me as the patient. I think people will be happy. I think your doctor will be happy with that instead of getting handed the list on the way out the door. The fourth thing is basic. A lot of people do this, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't do it. And it's bringing a list of your medications and your basic health history to the appointment. So if you take a few different medicines and if you've had a few different health issues and if you have a couple doctors that are following you, a couple specialists or whatever it is, keep a document with all that stuff up to date and have it for the doctor and have it for the staff. Because a lot of times the staff is putting that stuff into the computer system and trying to get you established as a new patient and whatnot. And a lot of times we just don't have the info. And hey, what meds do you take? Oh, I don't know. I take a couple different things. I take this one pill for my blood pressure, and my doctor wants to put me on a cholesterol pill. I'm on this one now, but he's going to switch to a different one. And it's like that's not helpful. I need to know the actual medicines. And of course, I can call your pharmacy. My electronic medical records often will pull from the pharmacy, and I can see what you're on. But it's really much more helpful if you just know what you're on. Like as the patient, that's part of the contract. You have to tell me what you're on and tell me what some of the story is. I'm not a mind reader. So that's basic stuff. Please bring your medication list, know your medicines. If you're on 2 different things, you should just know what they are. I mean, you're taking some drug and putting it in your body every day. Like, please know what the names of those things are. It's important for your own safety. And bring any relevant documents you have. Like, bring your insurance card. You'd be surprised how many people come in for their appointment right on time and everything's great, except their insurance card they bring is like old or it's expired or they don't have that insurance anymore. And it just kind of like jams up the work. So now that we're messing around on the phone calls and the computers and trying to figure out what the proper insurance is and all that stuff. And that's time where they're not spending with like me, like I'm waiting for them to come into the room and now they're delaying everyone else and the rest of the day too. So have your stuff, checked out and make sure that it's all up to date when you come in to see the doctor. And that is the story there. All these things take away from time from the visit and the quicker we can kind of get you in, the more time I can kind of spend like addressing your actual problem instead of like the secretarial work that goes into you making it into the exam room. So keep a list. Keep down all your stuff, your family history, your allergies, your medications. It's great. It's great when someone hands me a list and I can just hand it to the staff. They can throw it in the computer. I can double check it, and it's very easy to do. You just keep a document on your computer or on your phone, and you just print it on demand, and that's the story there. Number 5. This is I don't know. I don't want to say contentious. It's not really contentious, but it's a delicate topic, I should say. But please, when you come to the office, I think it's great if you bring a friend or a family member or somebody like another set of ears. That's very helpful, especially if you're very concerned. Some people get nervous or they clam up around the doctor. Or they can't tell they have all these questions in their head. They can't get them out, and they feel like they're in the spotlight, and they get like stage fright. So I get that entirely. Or if you're worried about getting bad news, or you're very anxious about the whole thing in general, so bring somebody, bring a spouse, bring a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a parent, just a close friend, a neighbor. People bring all kinds of people to the office, and that's totally fine. But please, if you have the choice, try to bring the right people to the office. Try to bring people that are helpful, because sometimes your companion actually impedes the visit. And I can tell all kinds of stories here, but a lot of times what happens is the companion will inject all these irrelevant details into the account. They'll inject their own baggage into the account and start telling a story about themselves. Oh, when I get this pain, I think it's this, and it could be your gallbladder, and blah, blah, blah. And they don't let the actual patient tell the story. They kind of talk over them, or they know better than the patient, or some of them try to impress the doctor with their medical knowledge about something that's not necessarily always relevant. And it's just, again, it just takes time from the patient to be able to tell the story, and it takes away from me being able to ask relevant questions because there's this random person interjecting. So try not to bring someone like that. Now, if you're married to someone like that, I'm sorry, because there's nothing I could do to help you there. But sometimes the expectations have to be the doctor and the patient are talking, and the third party is really more of an observer, and maybe you're taking notes, and you can interject relevant details. Maybe if the person's forgetting, hey, honey, did you forget that this actually started, 6 months ago? That was the first time you had this pain, and then you were good for a couple months. It didn't just start last week like you told the doctor. And oh yeah, you're right. But what often happens is the spouses are yelling at each other in the office. They're fighting. Let me tell the story. Who are you? Do you know my body better than I do? I've heard some crazy stuff. People telling each other, shut up, shut your mouth, all this stuff. And it really just adds tension to the whole encounter, and it doesn't help me, and it doesn't help the patient for sure. So if you know someone's going to act like that, maybe you just come yourself, and I'll write down some notes for you. Sometimes you get people giving their own, the third party observer, helper, friend person will start talking about their own problems. Hey doc, while I'm here, I want you to look at this pain I'm having. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. First of all, you're not a patient here. You're not registered here. I don't have any contract that we're going to treat you. I can't enter into a doctor-patient relationship. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's this, and then it's actually something terrible. That's crazy. I'm not going to put myself at risk, and I don't have time to do another visit when I'm in the room taking care of the first person still. You're trying to hijack the visit. So you get people who do that stuff all the time, and I think hey, you have a problem. That's great. Go, and when you go in the front, make an appointment. I'll see you in a week or two. I'm totally down to try to help you, but you can't just barge into the other person's visit and start throwing your own medical problems out there and expecting me to stop talking to the actual patient who's there to start addressing the visitor's concerns. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, the companion really should be more of a scribe. You should be taking notes. You should be observing what's going on. When the patient has questions later, hey, what did the doctor say exactly about this medicine I should be taking? The companion who's there should really say, oh, look, I wrote it down. You should take 20 milligrams twice a day, only when you need it for 14 days or whatever the story is. Take it with food. Don't take it with food. These are the things the doctor talked about that you can work on. You have to cut back on your eating of whatever food, and you have to drink less alcohol, and blah, blah, blah. These are all things that the companion should really be there taking notes for. And they can summarize. They can kind of ask questions that are relevant. They can kind of try to pull some of the history out of the patient if they know the patient isn't giving the proper history. Part of the story that the patient's forgotten, the companion's there to kind of fill in the gaps. That's totally great. And at the end of the day, a good companion for the patient is an asset to everybody. It's an asset to me because the patient understands what's going on better. It's an asset to the patient for the same reasons. They get a more comprehensive overview of what's going on, and they get that third person's thought process later in the car ride or whatever it is. But a bad companion can actually take away from the encounter and can make the whole thing just too stressful for everybody. And you start counting the seconds to get out of the room because you got this husband and wife screaming at each other in the room. And I'm like, guys, get a room. This is not where this is supposed to happen. So that's the story here. Those are the 5 tips on how to make your doctor-patient experience better for you and get more out of the whole reason of going to the doctor, which is to try to get some closure and try to get some, a diagnosis and maybe a way to figure out what's going on with you so you can get healthy or get whatever treatment you're looking for. So that's the story there. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, I would appreciate a feedback somewhere, a review on Apple or some rating or whatnot. These episodes have been going to YouTube also. I don't know if anyone watches that, but I guess I could see how many people watch it. So yes, people definitely do watch it. And I'll link the YouTube channel below. I've consolidated. I used to have a channel for the podcast and a channel for the practice, and that's just too much nonsense. So I kind of brought those together, and now it's just one channel for both. The name of the channel on YouTube is Precision GI. It's all one word. So youtube.com/Precision GI, and that's the channel, and you'll find all the videos that I make there. And that is the story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of The Real GI Doc Show. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player to catch my next episode. If you really want to show your appreciation for the show, take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a few seconds and is the best way to get other people to discover the show. If you use social media, you can find me under the handle @RealGIDoc, so feel free to follow, leave a comment, or just say hi. If you have a question about something gastro-related that you'd like me to answer on an upcoming episode, go to realgidoc.com or use the link in the show notes to leave me an audio question.
That's it for this episode of The Real GI Doc Show. Make sure to join Dr. Gandolfo next time to explore another interesting topic in gastrointestinal health. And remember, the views and opinions presented in today's episode are for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed in this episode should be considered or used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you're experiencing a health issue, please consult with a doctor or a medical provider in your area. Thanks again for listening to the show.